Welcome to Bible True Crime with Mr. Thoroughly. You can be a huge help to us if you subscribe and follow us on the different platforms. It makes us more available to other people when they search. Today's episode, not the island of Perpetual Tickling. I'm Steve, and today I am joined by my daughter Hannah.
Hi.
Today's episode, we are going to be looking at the 5th century BC, during the reign of Xerxes, also known as Ahasuerus, depending on which version of the Bible that you're using. At the moment that we pick up on this story, his queen is Esther, who is a Jew, and she was raised by her cousin, Mordecai. But nobody except for the Jews know who they really are. Now, to make a long story short, Esther spends 4 years preparing to be queen, and then she becomes queen. And that's going to bring us to chapter 2 and verse 19. And there's going to be an event that happens there that's pivotal to our story. When virgins were gathered together a second time, Mordecai sat within the king's gate. Now Esther had not revealed her family and her people, just as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai as when she was brought up by him. In those days, while Mordecai sat within the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on a gallows. And it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. So to sum that up, you have Mordecai that's sitting at the king's gate, and he overhears a conversation by two of the king's eunuchs where they are going to harm the king. He tells Esther about it. Esther tells the king, and these two eunuchs end up getting hanged for their plot of treachery.
So it seems that Mordecai and Esther were still loyal toward the king and everything, even though they were Jewish. Is this the Medo-Persian Empire at this time?
Yes, we're looking at the time when, now the Medes and the Persians, they'd conquered the Babylonians. The Babylonians are the ones that had conquered Israel and taken the Jews into captivity. So at this point in history, the Persians have had control over the Jewish captives for 45, 50 years at this point, and they have let several of them go back to Jerusalem.
Okay. So then where does Daniel take place on that time frame? And then also Cyrus is Persian, right?
Yeah. Cyrus was a Persian, and he's the one that conquered the Babylonians. And we're looking at in the 530s when all that happened, maybe 540s. So Daniel at that time, he was an old man when the Persians came in and conquered Babylon, and they believe he was in his 80s, and that's the point when he gets thrown in the lion's den. And so this is quite a bit later. This is at least 50, possibly 60 years after Daniel's time, as far as we know. Mordecai foils the plot of these two eunuchs, and this is in the 7th year of Xerxes or Ahasuerus' reign. So some time is going to take place before we start chapter 3. And chapter 3 is going to take place during the 12th year of his reign. So Esther has been queen now for 5 years. So verse 1 of chapter 3. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. And all the king's servants who were within the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. Then the king's servants who were within the king's gate said to Mordecai, Why do you transgress the king's command? Now it happened, when they spoke to him daily, and he would not listen to them, that they told it to Haman, to see whether Mordecai's words would stand. For Mordecai had told them he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow or pay homage, Haman was filled with wrath. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. Instead, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is, the lot, before Haman to determine the day and the month, until it fell on the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all the other peoples, and they do not keep the king's laws. Therefore it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work, to bring it into the king's treasuries. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews.
Well, that escalated quickly.
It sure did. Hannah, does this remind you of any other place in the Bible?
One of your favorite passages and one of my favorite passages is Daniel 3, when they refuse to bow down to the giant statue that Nebuchadnezzar makes.
Yeah, you see this a lot with the Jews. They won't bow down to other kings, to idols and things like that. And it really upsets these other people because they want them to be doing the same things as everybody else. So they're seen as rebellious. And Mordecai, he's no different. He's not going to bow down and pay homage to this Haman. And Haman is filled with wrath. But he decides right here, he doesn't just want to get Mordecai and punish him. He wants to punish all of Mordecai's people, which are the Jews, over the entire kingdom. Haman ends up making this decree where they're going to be able to wipe out all of the Jews, and he draws lots to pick a date, and that's called Pur, which becomes important later on in the book of Esther.
Seems like they had, like Haman had this personal agenda against Mordecai, kind of like how they had this personal agenda against Daniel, and they're like, how should we get him? Oh, he prays, like he's loyal to his God, so we'll get him that way. And then they get the king to pass something like that. It's really similar. But it seems like Daniel and Esther have so many parallels to them. It's just Daniel, you see the presence of God a lot more clearly, and in Esther, it's a lot more subtle.
Right. Now, as this story continues, Mordecai is going to find out about this decree that's gone out to destroy all the Jews on that certain date. And he's going to tell Esther about it. He's going to convince Esther to do something about it. And at risk of her own life, she's going to go before the king, which is not something that she could do unless she was summoned. So she decides that she's very brave, and she decides that she's going to do it. She goes before the king. And the first thing that she does is ask the king if he and Haman would come and dine with her. So she prepares a banquet for them. She's going to end up doing this twice, but in between the first banquet and the second banquet, an interesting event is going to happen. So we're going to pick up here in chapter 5 and verse 9. So Haman went out that day joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand or tremble before him, he was filled with indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, and he sent and called for his friends and his wife Zeresh. Then Haman told them of the great riches, the multitude of his children, everything in which the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and the servants of the king. Moreover, Haman said, besides, Queen Esther invited no one but me to come in with the king to the banquet that she prepared, and tomorrow I am again invited by her, along with the king. Yet all this avails me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Let a gallows be made 50 cubits high, and in the morning suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it. Then go merrily with the king to the banquet." So Hannah, what did Haman do here?
Okay, so he was joyful and then he was filled with wrath again just because he saw Mordecai, and then he goes home and then he brags a whole bunch. Then he brags about the queen inviting him along with the king, and he seems to think he's all that in a bag of chips. But then he gets advice on how to get back at Mordecai.
And what does his wife and his friends advise him to do to get back at Mordecai?
So all of them say, my version says, let a gallows 50 cubits high be made and tell the king to have Mordecai hanged upon it in the morning.
Okay, so that's what's going to happen the very next morning here. And now we're going to pick up in chapter 6, and I'm going to read the entire chapter here. That night, the king could not sleep. So one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, the doorkeepers, who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Then the king said, "What honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" And the king's servants who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." Well, Hannah, you talking about all that in a bag of chips is making me hungry. But here we have a situation where the king's hearing the Chronicles read to him, and he hears about the plot by those two eunuchs and how Mordecai foiled it. And he's like, well, what'd they do for Mordecai? And the answer is that nothing was done for Mordecai.
I think that shows that Mordecai was really humble.
Yeah, he didn't demand anything. He didn't want any recognition for what he had did. And what he did was a pretty big thing. And that's what the king is seeing right here. And this is a great moment here. This is one of my favorite moments in the whole book of Esther that's coming up here. So let's read on.
Before you read the next part, how long had it been since Mordecai saved his life? Since it's in this book and he's just thinking about it. And it's like, oh, wait, that happened.
It looks like it's been about 5 years because it talks about the 7th year of the king's reign, and then Mordecai foils the plot. And then when Haman starts planning this revenge against Mordecai and the Jews, it's the 12th year of his reign. So we're looking at 5 years that's happened in between here.
Okay.
So let's look at chapter 6 and verse 4. So the king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to suggest that the king hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. The king's servant said to him, "Haman is there, standing in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." So Haman came in, and the king asked him, "What shall be done for the man whom the king delights to honor?" Now Haman thought in his heart, "Whom would the king delight to honor more than me?" And Haman answered the king, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let a royal robe be brought which the king has worn, and a horse on which the king has ridden, which has a royal crest placed on its head. Then let this robe and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array the man whom the king delights to honor. Then parade him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, 'Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.'"
So your version says array and mine says dress. So that just means they put clothes on him, right? That's all that means.
Yeah, it would have been really fancy clothes to really distinguish him and honor him. And it's really neat here because Haman thinks that he's the one that's going to get honored. His greatest enemy is Mordecai. So the worst possible event is about to take place. So let's look at verse 10. Then the king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the robe and the horse, as you have suggested, and do so for Mordecai the Jew, who sits within the king's gate. Leave nothing undone of all that you have spoken." So Haman took the robe and the horse, arrayed Mordecai, and led him on horseback through the city square, and proclaimed before him, Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. Afterward, Mordecai went back to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house, mourning with his head covered. When Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him, his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him." While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared.
So it seems like since it was his wife Zeresh and all his friends had said earlier, you should get it so that he can be hanged on the gallows. Now that they know he's Jewish, they kind of changed their tune. They're like, you can't overcome him. You're going to fall before him because he's Jewish. And it seems like the king is very clearly aware that Mordecai is Jewish. And so earlier when he just handed off the signet ring and said, do whatever with his people, he hadn't known that it was the Jewish people specifically.
No, and I think Haman hid that from the king. He just told him, there's these people plotting against you. Let me take care of this matter. And he uses the king's signet ring to make it all official. But the king doesn't realize exactly who it is. And now, he definitely knows that Mordecai is a Jew, but he doesn't put it together, which really tells us that he doesn't know that it's the Jews that are going to be exterminated.
Could you talk about the strength of the signet ring for a second?
So the signet ring was something that showed the king's official seal. It's like his signature on something, and that's what they would use at that time. But sometimes an official could use the king's signet ring to make something official by the king. And once a decree was made from a king in the time of the Persians, there was a law that it couldn't be revoked, so they couldn't stop it. And that's what's going to cause a little bit of problem with how to solve this issue that's about to come up. But as we can see here, you've got Esther has planned this second banquet. So all these events have happened before Haman and the king are going to go before Esther the next time. So let's pick up there, and we're going to look at chapter 7. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. And on the second day, at the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Up to half the kingdom, it shall be done." Then Queen Esther answered and said, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss." So King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he, who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing?" And Esther said, "The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman."
It seems that she's using very clever, very on purpose language. Like she's setting really low expectations. Like if it pleases you, please let me stay alive. Like if we were just going to be slaves, we wouldn't even bother you with this. But it's please let me stay alive. It seems very strategic the way she's saying this.
You really get the sense here that the king, he's a very powerful man. And it talks about his reign at this time in Esther, that he reigns everywhere from India all the way to Ethiopia and Africa. He has 127 provinces under his control. And he is somebody that what he says goes, and everybody has to accept it or they're going to be in trouble. But yet, when it comes to this matter, he's completely clueless as to what's going on. So when Esther says, there's somebody trying to kill me, and not just me, but all my people, to annihilate us, he's like, who would even dare to do such a thing? And of course, Haman is right there in the room, and she's saying, it's this wicked Haman that's going to do it. So just to recap a little bit here, Haman hates Mordecai. He's trying to not only destroy Mordecai, but all of his people. And he has built a gallows so that he can have Mordecai hanged upon it. Let me start again with verse 6. And Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life. And he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. When the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, will he also assault the queen while I am in the house? As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Haman here, he realizes that he is in huge trouble. So he's begging for his life from the queen. But as he's doing that, the king comes across it. And he thinks that Haman's even making things even worse. So they end up covering Haman's face. Now, Hannah, what does that mean?
So from what I've seen about this, and I don't know too much about it, but it seems like that was something that when somebody was sentenced to condemnation, they covered it with a veil of some kind, and it was like saying they're unworthy to see the light or unworthy saying to see the king. And so it's like he's condemned at this point. Like that was what marked it in this culture.
It's the end of Haman right now. So now let's see what is going to happen next. Verse 9. Now, Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, look, the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath subsided. So, Hannah, what do you think about the relationship between the king and the queen at this point?
Something interesting is it seems like they sort of barely know each other, and Esther is like she's making all these feasts, and it's always Haman and the king are going to visit her. In 7 verse 1, it says the king and Haman went in to feast with Queen Esther. And so it seems like it's the king and Haman together, and Haman like pairs himself with the king. But then in verse 6, like after there's this big reveal by Esther, it seems like the tables are swapped. Like there's this big transition because it says then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. And it seems like the king and the queen are this one united front. And the king's willing to back up Esther in whatever she's wanting to do.
Yeah, you can see that the king really sides with the queen, and Haman is the odd man out here. And the king has no problem having Haman hanged right there. So the rest of the story is really interesting here too, because there's still the decree to destroy the Jews by these certain people. But what the king is going to do now is he's going to pass another decree that allows the Jews to defend themselves. And not only that, but he's going to have the government's help, and all the officials are going to aid the Jews against those that are seeking to destroy them. So where it was going to be an extermination of the Jews, it ends up being an extermination of the Jews' enemies, and all that gets carried out. Even Haman's 10 sons are all going to be hanged on the same gallows where Haman is hanged. So they are destroyed and wiped out, and the Jews have a celebration of this event that is still in place today. It's called the Feast of Purim, and it's going to take place in March of this year, I believe. And it's where they celebrate that they were delivered from Haman and that Haman was killed in his murderous plot.
I'd heard that while celebrating Purim, Jews use noisemakers instead of saying Haman's name, and children will stomp their feet with Haman's name written on the bottom of their shoes. And it's like Haman gets them really riled up because of all the things he did.
They've had a 2,500 years where Haman's been their enemy, and they got their revenge on him.
All right, so what's the verse for this episode?
I'd like to read James chapter 1, verse 22. But be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. All scripture is taken from the New King James Version, the New American Standard Bible, or the English Standard Version.
Thank you for joining us today. Be sure to subscribe and follow. Keep reading and join us next week for another episode.